Hey everyone, Gabriel Nassif, aka Yellowhat, and today I'm going to be bringing you my top 10 Kamigawa Neon Dynasty cards for Modern. Starting with at number 11, actually, wouldn't be a real top 10 if I didn't have extra cards right. I'm going to go with Kaito Shitsuki, the new Planeswalker, a black, a blue, and a 1. It has a passive that says at the beginning of your end step, if it entered the battlefield this turn, he phases out. It starts with free loyalty. The +1 says draw a card, then discard a card unless you attack this turn. The -2 is create a 1/1 blue ninja token with this creature cannot be blocked. And it also has a -7 ultimate that should not be super relevant. That says you get an emblem with whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a blue or black creature card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So what I like about this card is that for only 3 mana, you've got a Planeswalker that can snowball the game. It self-sustains, it creates a creature, then you start plussing it and drawing some cards. And you can imagine games where you lead with maybe some discard spells, you play that on turn 3. It protects itself because it phases the turn it comes into play. Should point out that entering the battlefield happens only once. When it phases back in, it doesn't count as entering the battlefield, so it will only protect itself the first time. And that might be enough though. Protect itself the first time, then you get to untap, maybe you have removal up, counterspell mana up. And a bit like, in a different way, but a bit like Liliana of the Veil can solo win you the game, just plus ultimate. This one can solo win you the game kind of if you protect it by just being a Hauling Mine, some damage, some extra creatures, etc. So they casted it pretty aggressively. I wouldn't say that this card is broken. I doubt it'll be broken, but it might just be good enough. Maybe you could compare it to a card like Grist as well. That's also a 3 mana Planeswalker that can somewhat start dominating the board if it goes unchecked. At number 10, I have Invoke Calamity, which is an instant with a casting cost of red, 1, so 5 mana value, and reads, you may cast up to 2 instant and or sorcery spells with total mana value 6 or less from your graveyard and or hand without paying their mana cost. If those spells would be put into your graveyard, exile them instead. Exile Invoke Calamity. So I think this card could potentially be good in something like a blue-red mid-range, a blue-red control deck, where you're just flashing back cards like Lightning Bolt, Opt, Cryptic Command, Archmage Charm, etc. So basically what it does is on turn 5, you end of turn cast that, and you get flashback, let's say, a Lightning Bolt plus a Cryptic Command, or maybe they're trying to cast a spell and you flashback a counter spell and a Cryptic Command. You can maybe flashback 2 Archmage Charms. So I see it more as a control card, kind of a payoff, 5 mana, instant speed card that will take over the game with an overwhelming amount of card advantage. You can also play another one from your hand. If you have multiples, you can play one from your hand, and can imagine casting an Opt from the graveyard plus a second copy of from your hand. You could also have discarded one earlier in the game, and then you get that like a little extra value and cast it again. So you cast an Opt the first time, cast the second one, and it was the second one you cast 2 more spells. So it might be enough to see play. You can compare it a bit to a Snapcaster Mage or maybe a Torrential Gearhulk, kind of a late game card that takes over the game. The advantage is that it's instant speed as opposed to something like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. The downside is that it requires all setup, and it's obviously pretty weak against Graveyard Hate. At number 9, I have Tesseract Flesh, which is a Planeswalker for blue 2. It has 4 loyalty, +1 draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact. -2 target artifact becomes an artifact creature. If it isn't a vehicle, it has base power and toughness 4/4. And -6, you get an emblem was whenever an artifact you control becomes tapped, draw a card. On top of that, it has a passive that reads, The first activated ability of an artifact you activate each turn costs 2 less to activate, meaning 1 artifact once per turn. So without the passive, it looks a bit like Karn Sign of Urza. It has a +1 that draws you some cards. It has a -2 that gives you a large creature, and I guess it has a pretty decent ultimate, not too far to get, not too expensive to get, and can take over the game. But I think that without the passive, the card is pretty average, nothing special. I think the card will shine if you're able to use the passive efficiently. So get the value by activating an equipment, something like Shadow Spear or Nettle Cyst, maybe a card like Maze Mind Tome. You can also sack some clues. You can also sack clues on their turn. You can use the ability once on your turn and once on their turn. And yeah, there's not a ton to do as a passive, I feel, but I feel like if you can cheat some extra mana every turn, that card can be pretty powerful. It's possible the card should be a bit lower. Maybe Kaito is just a better Planeswalker for Modern. I think one of the problems with Tesseract is that it has tough competition. At 4, you've got Urza, which is an amazing creature and a staple in a lot of these artifact decks. So Tesseract would be competing for Urza unless you want to play some copies of each. So that's kind of one of the reasons why Tesseract might not see much play at all. Another cool synergy with the -2 is that you can turn your Esper Sentinel into a 4/4, making it that much tougher for your opponents to cast spells without letting you draw cards. At number 8, I have the first one of the land cycle. The legendary land cycle was Channel. These cards are going to be really good for Modern, and the blue one's probably the weakest one, but it might still see a bit of play. The blue one taps for blue, and it has Channel, a blue and free. Discard it, return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So I feel like the blue one has one of the weakest effect. One of the cool plays you can make, though, if you're playing a control deck, is bounce Teferi, Time Raveler, end of their turn. Since you're not casting a spell, you can still use abilities, and that might let you get out of the Teferi lock you're under. So that's a cool ability. My problem with this card is that, yeah, A, ability is not super good, pretty expensive to use, and B, I know that typically in the blue control decks anyways, you're struggling to get enough basics in the first place because you want to play Hall of the Storm Giants, you want to play maybe Castle Vantress, you need to play a lot of dual lands because you're trying to cast Archmage Charm, but also cast double white cards a lot of the time, so a lot of your lands are just fetch lands and dual lands, and you want that critical mass of basics to not run out of lands to fetch in the mid game and be a little better against Blood Moon. So you'll probably find this card in a deck like Merfolk. Basically, all the decks that were able to play maybe 5 or more basic lands before these lands got printed will probably be able to easily slot in at least one of the legendary land in a mana base. But if you're already only playing, 3 or 4 islands in the first place, that might be a little tougher. So yeah, Otawara will probably see a little play, but probably the least impactful of all the new lands. Next, at 7, I've got the white land of the cycle, Eiganjo, Seed of the Empire, and this one channels for white and 2. You discard it, you deal 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, and same ability cost reduction. So this one will almost definitely see play in Hammer Time that can afford to play cut a basic planes for that land. The ability is pretty relevant. You even have a few legends in your deck, and while the ability is not great, it's decent enough. I don't think this card will make the cut in something like blue-white control. Same issue as the blue one. You don't have that many basics in the first place, even less so white lands. I do think this Eiganjo is better than the original Eiganjo that saw a tiny bit of play in Hammer Time decks at some point. So yeah, nothing to write home about, but decent play, and for some decks it's just going to be a free roll like land, death and taxes, etc., etc. Number 6, I have A white card, March of Otherworldly Light. For white and X, you exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment with mana value X or less. And like the rest of the cards in this cycle, it has as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may exile any number of white cards from your hand. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. So the base rate is for a white and 1, you can get rid of a Ragavan. For a white, you can get rid of a Chalice, even if it's a Chalice on 1, then you have to pay a little extra. But yeah, so basically you're trading down on mana unless you're pitching cards from your hand, and then you might, gain a mana, break even on mana. So not super, super great, but it is very versatile. It is instant speed. It is another removal spell you can play with Chalice of the Void in your deck. If you're gonna cast Chalice for 1 anyways, that card, you'll still be able to use it. So that's good. And the big appeal for Modern is that for 1 white at instant speed, you get to get rid of Urza Saga, and you even get to do it with a trigger on the stack if you can, meaning they don't even get the 1 mana the first time around. So super, super good against the Saga decks. Is it gonna be a card that sees a ton of play in the main deck, more of a sideboard card? Maybe it just won't be good enough. It obviously competes with cards like Prismatic Ending and Solitude in a deck like Blue-White Control. But I could see Blue-White Control specifically just play the full 12, 4 Ending, 4 Solitudes, and 4 March, even though March is a bit more expensive. And how much this card sees play might just come down to how good it feels and how big of an advantage it is to get rid of Urza Saga for 1 mana. I could see that card maybe being a sideboard card where you just bring them in against Urza Saga and maybe a few other matchups. And I'm kind of a believer. I think there's a lot of people who think it's just a little too expensive in the first place to be able to just play a lot of copies of that card. So I guess we'll see. At number 5, I've got Springleaf Drum 2.0 Moonsnare Prototype, which is an artifact for 1 blue. It has tap itself plus tap a non-tap artifact or creature you control, add a colorless mana. And it has channel a blue and 4. Discard Moonsnare Prototype. The owner of target non-land permanent puts it on the top or bottom of their library. I think that card might be quite good because it can act as Springleaf Drum 5 to 8 in some affinity decks. I think the channel ability is quite strong. You're trading 1 for 1, not card disadvantage, not just a simple bounce. So that's really good. And the danger when you're playing a lot of cards like Springleaf Drum is that you just flood in the mid game because you still have to play 18, 20 lands, but then you've got these extra mana sources that are just terrible top decks. So the fact that they gave it a really, really, I feel, strong ability, honestly, on the channel is it could be huge. Another cool thing about this card is that it can be good in decks that wish they could play Springleaf Drum but don't have enough creature to do so. Typically a deck like Thopter Foundry combo, or yeah, that's kind of the first one that comes to mind. You play that on turn 1, on turn 2 you play your Thopter Foundry, maybe cast another 1 mana artifact off it, and then you get to cast Urza on turn 3 or another high impact card. So yeah, Drum was already a card that was played a ton in Modern. You play 4 copies in Affinity, whether it's the kind of more aggressive version or the blue-eyed version. You play 4 copies in most Hammer Time lists. So Springleaf Drum has proven itself to be a really strong card, and Moonsnare Prototype brings something a little different to the table, but in the same vein, and I'm excited to see if it takes some of these artifact decks to the next level and how good it is, how crazy you can go now that you have even more enablers. And ever since they banned Mox Opal, some of your draws might feel a bit underwhelming if you don't have Springleaf Drum in your opening hand, and now you just get more redundancy. Next on my list at number 4, I have Takenuma Abandonmeier, the black land of the cycle. I say black, technically they're colorless, but you get it. It has channel a black and free, discard it, mill 3 cards, then return a creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So an obvious home is a deck like Rakdos Lurrus, where sometimes you do play Blood Moon in the sideboard, I guess, but overall you can probably afford the land. This is a deck that already played the other legendary black and red lands, and Meyer has some nice synergy. Was Lurrus, was Kroxa, was Delirium. So a lot of the long games come down to using Kolaghan's Command to get back your Lurrus, and this card will help a bit as well. It's not clear if a deck like John Sagavan was Renin 6 is going to want that card. The lands that play that tap only for black mana are really bad, and you really want to play as few of them as possible. It is kind of cool that it loops with Ren to kind of bring back the Ren, which in turn Ren can bring that land back to your hand. But you already maybe have a few cycle lands. You have Urza Saga to bring back. You have a lot of good lands you can already get back. So I think maybe that card is a bit too high on my list, but it should see some play. The effect's pretty solid, you know, and it offers a lot of good synergies. At number 3, so Kenzan, Crucible of Defiance, taps for red, channel red and free, discard it, create 2 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens, they gain haste until end of turn, and this ability costs 1 less, yada yada yada. So yeah, I really like that they managed to make cards that are good for modern, good enough for modern without being too good for standard. So they managed to print these cards in a standard set, quote unquote, but at the same time make cards that are going to be good enough for modern, so you play in modern and have an impact there without being too good for standard. So that was a pretty cool feat from the design team. And this one is especially good because A, it's in the Blue Moon colors, Blood Moon colors, so you're not going to get screwed over. It already tapped for red. The ability is also on theme for red aggressive decks, and it has a lot of nice use. Was Renin 6, obviously. You could imagine a control deck, maybe something like Teamer Control, based around Renin 6, where you just use Kenzan as one of your win conditions. You know, you just say go. Whenever they don't do anything, boom, you get 2 1/1s, untap, get it back, rinse, repeat. This card will almost definitely see play in Burn, and yeah, it's quote-unquote Blood Moon proof, and it's in the Renin 6 colors, which is definitely a nice bonus. It might also see play, almost definitely will see play in the creativity decks as just kind of extra Dwarven Mines, extra ways to make tokens without playing creatures in your deck. So yeah, so Kenzan has a lot going for it, and it'll probably see a ton of play and surely win many games. All right, number 2, not a land, we've got Lion Sash, which is an artifact creature equipment cat for white and 1. It's a 1/1. It has an ability that reads white, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent card, put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash, and it has Reconfigure 2, which is basically like equipment, but for a creature. And it works well with Sigardar's Aid, and it also works well with Pure Steel Paladin. So tons of things going for that card. It's a bit reminiscent of Scavenging Ooze, the +1/+1 ability that exiles cards from the graveyard, except it doesn't gain life, but a little easier to get the counter since it's any permanence, including a card like a fetch land. So really cool card, really strong card. The fact that Stoneforge Mystic is legal in Modern takes that card to the next level. I think that if it wasn't for Stoneforge Mystic, that card would just be kind of whatever, but having access to Graveyard Hate, just pretty versatile card, cheap card. You can play it in Lura's deck, which is huge. As I said, it works well with Sigardar's Aid and Pure Steel Paladin. I think you'll get to draw the card when you cast it, and you'll get to move it around for free. So huge. Yeah, just most modern decks are based on their graveyards in some way or another, whether it's Allura's deck, Renin 6, dedicated graveyard deck. And I think that card's just going to be a 1 or maybe even a 2 of in any Stoneforge Mystic decks. And I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe even the third copy in the sideboard for some matchups, because it is pretty fragile, whether it's the artifact part or the creature part. But yeah, just awesome card and potential game changer. And at number 1, not much of a surprise, Boseiju Who Endures. Taps for a green, legendary land, channel a green and 1, discard it, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a land card with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So first off, basic land type means a card like Hallowed Fountain, Tundra, etc., not just basic lands. So not as good in that regard as something like Assassin's Trophy or Field of Ruin. But yeah, Boseiju, super hyped card. I was almost a little annoyed at how hyped it was, but I came around. I do think this card is going to have a huge impact on the format. And my take is that this card is going to help Ren and 6 decks and just kind of fair decks more and hurt decks like Tron or Amulet Titan. The way I see it, the Ren and 6 decks are probably going to play 1 or 2 copies in the main and go up to 4 copies after sideboard. Whereas sure, Tron and Titan can maybe get it with Expedition Map, kind of search for it, and they can get rid of the Blood Moon. But I think that on average, they're gonna be hurt more by this card. I think that against Tron, that card is amazing, and you just recur it, and it'll win you the game. Against Amulet Titan, I think hitting the bounce land specifically is going to be huge. In a pinch, it also does get rid of a Dryad, an Amulet, etc., etc. So yeah, I think this card's just huge. I think it's also huge against decks like Belcher and Oops All Spells that don't play lands. So it's basically 2 mana Stone Rain that you can get back with Ren and 6. So potentially Boseiju could just wipe out a bunch of artifacts from Modern. It will be interesting to see if these deck adapts and start playing basic lands in the sideboard, and then you get in some kind of mind game war where did they bring in a basic? Do they have a basic? I might just, instead of time walking them by Stone Ringing them for 2 mana, all of a sudden you're kind of time walking yourself because you're wasting your turn channeling the Boseiju, and they just, they just get a land and they kind of got you. So that's gonna be fun to see how this interaction plays out. But yeah, that card is potentially format warping. If anything, I think it's gonna really help all the Ren and 6 decks, as if Ren and 6 was not good enough. I know that I've been playing a lot of the Omnath Yorion deck, and that deck typically struggled against decks like Oops All Spells and Belcher, so it'll be a great addition there. The Amulet Titan matchup was also bad, and I've heard people say it's not a big deal against a deck like Amulet Titan. They play a bunch of basics anyways. They'll get a Forest, they'll ramp, and it won't matter that much. But I do feel like hitting the bounce land is going to be huge, going to buy you so much time, and down the line you can also get rid of Dryads and Amulet and whatnot. So yeah, Boseiju Who Endures, we'll see, but that card, I think it's right now anyways, the consensus is the most impactful card in the set by a decent bit. And yeah, there you have it, my top 10 from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty for Modern. Let me know if you agree. Let me know what you think I missed, what I got right. Feel free to leave a comment down below. And I'll see you all next time. Take care.